With Bungie hanging up their hat once the story of Noble Team was told, 343 Industries entered the fray and took up the mantle of development responsibility for the Halo franchise. This is a supercut of my work covering Halo 4, their first game, a level-by-level analysis of the entire campaign from beginning to end. Before Dawn, the game's first level, begins, Dr. Catherine Halsey gives insight into the lives of the children chosen for the Spartan 2 program, which Master Chief was a part of, during a brief prologue.
Children's minds are more easily accepting of indoctrination. Their bodies more adaptable to augmentation. The result was the ultimate soldier.
Halo 4's most prevalent theme is the divide between man and machine and the discussion of what it really means to be human, which makes 343 putting it front and centre from minute one a clear statement of intent, a demonstration of how important they deem it to be. Given the prologue subject matter, Master Chief will be the first character you think of, but equally the further the story progresses, the clearer it becomes that it applies just as much to Cortana.
Before this is all over, promise me you'll figure out which one of us is the machine.
I shan't delve any deeper into that aspect of the game at this stage though, as it's not overly relevant during Halo 4's earliest moments. Dawn continues Halo's story 4 years and 7 months after the trilogy concluded. Halo 3 ended with Master Chief in cryosleep drifting in space, although the legendary ending did leave things on a cliffhanger, with a mysterious planetoid we'll soon come to know as Requiem drifting into view. With an intruder alert sounding across the remains of the derelict ship, Cortana wakes Chief. But Ben, I hear you asking, why is he wearing different armour to that he had on at the end of the trilogy when he's been stuck in a tube for donkeys? The answer apparently is nanomachines, best not to question it too much. Your initial goal is to reach the observation deck, but first it's likely you'll find a terminal which provides an extremely quick recap of events in Halo Combat Evolved 2 and 3. Getting those new to the series up to speed is by no means a bad idea, however it also includes an error so basic it boggles my mind.
Pursuing the Covenant flagship after an attack on Earth, Spartan 117 arrives at Halo Installation 05 to find the Covenant erupting into civil war. After preventing the Covenant from firing the ring, 117 followed them back to Earth in search of a Forerunner installation that can activate all the galaxy's Halos.
That is not what happened at all. As you can see quite clearly here, it's Miranda Keyes and the Arbiter who prevent Installation 05 from firing at the end of Halo 2, with Master Chief not even on the ring at the time. I cannot fathom how not a single person managed to catch something so sloppy which appears mere minutes into the campaign. Thankfully, the rest of Dawn is nowhere near as exasperating. Despite its age, Halo 4 is to this day a very visually impressive title, and a lot of kudos should be given to 343 Industries for that. Playing it at 4K resolution with an exceptionally high frame rate, it gives plenty of modern shooters a run for their money in the looks department. What sits on top of that raw beauty, the aesthetic and art direction, is handled poorly frequently during later levels. I'm looking at you especially, ridiculously over-designed Forerunner areas, but the Forward Unto Dawn is one setting where I think a good balance is generally struck. Rooms lit only by flashing screens, gloomy corridors, and air thick with what looks like ash combine to create a foreboding atmosphere few later sections in Halo 4 manage to match. I've a thorough dislike of this climbing section which cuts through the tension though. While there aren't massive button prompts flashing on screen telling you when you need to reposition, Master Chief instead looks in the direction you need to head, which is way better. It's still an early sign of Call of Duty-esque design sensibilities beginning to creep into a series which never needed them. It's only a speedy climbing sequence on this occasion, but it will soon enough permeate much of 4's design. Watching an elite get chucked down an elevator shaft is a nice reward once you get to the top at least.
I thought we had a truce with the Covenant.
A lot can happen in 4 years. Either way, he's probably not alone. We should be careful.
Arriving at the observation deck, it's time to do some shooting, or it is once you've done some assassinating first, with Master Chief and Cortana making a shocking discovery after the Covenant have been cleared.
The good news is these Covenant aren't outfitted like standard military. It's possible we just came across a rogue salvage ship. Or we might have stumbled into an entire Covenant fleet.
Maybe they haven't recognized us.
That's one possibility.
You might remember that in Combat Evolved, Bungie also gave you an opportunity to silently take down a grunt to get used to the concept of occasionally being stealthy, and this is only the first of a ton of similarities Dawn shares with other opening missions in the franchise. The setting is of course a Halo staple, with the aforementioned Pillar of Autumn, Halo 2's Cairo Station, and Infinite's warship Gabrakan all unfolding within ships and the like disconnected from the rest of their campaigns. You also have to fight off enemies who arrive in intervals and burst out of boarding craft like you do in Combat Evolved and again in 2, and there's also a firefight outside where the vacuum of space muffles your shots, which is also a part of Cairo Station. Dawn also features a race to escape the ship as everything explodes and crumbles around you, which 343 Industries would later build on too, with a more extravagant version of it appearing at the end of Infinite's first level. After Sierra 117 shook things up at the beginning of Halo 3, taking place on Earth, it's a welcome return to the familiar. Next up are some pretty basic encounters which give you time to get accustomed to the feel of combat in this new take on Halo without there being too much risk of you popping your clogs. So I want to use this time to touch on Dawn's music. One area Halo 4 doesn't draw on much at all from its predecessors is in its soundtrack, which is a radical departure from the work of Marty O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore we enjoyed so much across the trilogy ODST and Reach. Composed by Neil Davidge and Kazuma Janucci, it's a very hit or miss affair that moves so far away from previous motifs as to often become unrecognisable, but it does nonetheless have its bright spots. Janucci's pieces, for me, tend to be the OST's stronger entries, particularly those which are less generic or orchestral and incorporate more otherworldly elements, and the track Intruders, which kicks in after the Covenant's big reveal, is a great example of that. It's an instantly recognisable number which fits Dawn's mysterious tone to perfection, something which can't always be said about the way Halo 4's missions and music combine. Listen to Intruders, then later tracks Belly of the Beast and Gravity After to see what I mean. The first may not be in keeping with what we're used to, but it has its own merits, while the other two sound a lot like those you can hear in most other shooters. With a fair few deceased grunts, jackals and elites now filling the ship's hallways, it's time to head outside to launch a missile at one of the Covenant's cruisers. You're also given your first hint that Cortana may be having a few issues.
The auxiliary launch station should be to your left, out of the airlocks. You'll have to prime the launch for ignition.
Cortana.
It's nothing. Just get to the launch station.
Tackling the Covenant on the outside of the Forward Unto Dawn is one of the more memorable parts of Halo 4 in my eyes, although it's not without its shortcomings. From a combat perspective, it does plenty right. 343 leaves you a battle rifle it's practically impossible to miss upon entering the area, a trick Bungie often used to ensure you had at minimum one weapon suited for the following encounter. Blasting the Covenant as more and more weapons and bodies begin to float around you adds spectacle to proceedings, as does the arena's scale. Combat feels suitably cinematic without going over the top as 343 sometimes does during the rest of the campaign. Their obsession with environmental visual clutter, with many surfaces being over-designed and too busy, is an issue, but my biggest problem is with the music itself, or rather the fact it's included at all. One of the most interesting things about an encounter like this is that you can't hear anything near as well as you can the rest of the time, which makes the soundscape unique. Why you'd then add a loud orchestral score on top which detracts from the atmosphere which could have otherwise been built is beyond me. Although Chief does succeed in his goal, firing a missile directly into the heart of a Covenant cruiser, it's seemingly an exercise in futility as a gravity well begins sucking in everything around it. Back inside, you have to run a gauntlet as what remains of the ship begins to fall apart around you. I've mentioned the idea of Halo 4 being cinematic a few times now, in terms of both music and combat especially, as it's without doubt something 343 tries to regularly inject into Halo 4. As mentioned, they go way too far with it, way too often, but if it were just a brief sequence like this one every now and then, I'd have no problem with their inclusion whatsoever. Despite a valiant effort, Master Chief is unable to escape the gravity well, and after a nasty bump, Dawn fades to black to reveal the game's title, another first for the series.
We're caught in the gravity well.
Can you track the escape pods?
Negative. Look out!
Halo 4's second level, Requiem, swiftly follows. The mission begins with Master Chief plummeting towards the Forerunner world he'll soon come to know as Requiem. If you've played most other Halo titles prior, you'll recognise these scenes as being part of a rich tradition for the series. Combat Evolved's second mission begins with the lifeboat you're in crash landing. In 2, Chief's second mission opens with his Pelican suffering a somewhat bumpy landing. 3 features similar, although granted on that occasion it's right at the start of the campaign, and even ODST's first few moments involve the rookie's drop into New Mombasa going wrong. If I were one of Master Chief's colleagues, based on all the evidence, I'd advise him to avoid heights wherever possible. The discussion between he and Cortana which follows is the first proper chinwag the pair have about her impending rampancy. AIs begin to deteriorate after 7 years, and Cortana has been in service for 8. Chief believes there may be a solution if the pair can reach Cortana's creator, Dr. Catherine Halsey, but she remains unconvinced.
Halsey.
Chief.
We need to find Halsey.
Chief, please.
She made you. She can fix you.
I won't recover from rampancy, Chief.
If we can just get back to Earth and find Halsey, she can fix this.
Don't make a girl a promise you can't keep.
That final line is also a callback to dialogue at the end of Halo 2's Gravemind.
Chief, when you get to Earth, good luck.
After I'm through with truth.
Don't make a girl a promise if you know you can't keep it.
And it's spoken by Halsey herself during Halo Legends episode The Package.
We make our own luck, but I'll always be there when you need
Don't
me.
make a girl a promise if you know you can't keep it.
Given Cortana was created using a copy of Halsey's brain, it's nice justification for her repeated use of the phrase. In amongst the debris, information can be gleaned from various sources. A transmission from the Covenant mentions the Prometheans, another broadcasts only the word Didact, both fine, but it's the third which leaves me struggling to contain my disbelief. A single human terminal can be interacted with, which contains a snippet of Halsey talking about Cortana.
The interesting factor here isn't that H1 disabled the viral termination code I implanted in her matrix. These metrics imply its success wasn't just unlikely, but that even the accepted 7-year life cycle estimates may not apply.
Look, I know it's a video game, and concessions do have to be made at the altar of storytelling, but I find it hilariously convenient that the one functioning bit of tech nearby just so happens to elaborate on exactly what Master Chief and Cortana were talking about mere seconds earlier. Narrative misgivings aside, it's hard to deny that the areas you travel through during most of Requiem, but especially here at the start, are breathtaking. The canyon, filled with the shells of once proud ships, is a gorgeous way to begin proceedings, and it gets even more spectacular as you round a corner and are greeted by towering Forerunner structures suspended in mid-air, surrounded by natural beauty. When talking about 4's opening level, I spoke of what a good job 343 did graphically with the Forward Unto Dawn's gloomy corridors, and here we're given evidence they are able to handle exterior environments just as well too. A lot of people have issues with the game's art style and aesthetic, myself included, but in terms of the game being a raw graphical showcase, there are few titles released during the same period which can match it, indoors or out. I do wonder whether that push for what was, at the time, peerless graphical fidelity came at a cost, though, when it comes to the more spacious settings. Requiem's first encounter actually flatters to deceive. It's reminiscent of how Bungie would construct their larger areas, with space to play around with in the middle and tracks round the outside letting you move between firefights with ease. The problem is that it's the exception that proves the rule. Other than this example, and perhaps one or two others later in the campaign, there generally seems to be a trade-off which is particularly noticeable when 4's scale increases. On the one hand, you get some of the best graphics the 7th generation of consoles has to offer. On the other, it certainly seems to me as if level design and AI took a massive hit to accommodate the extra Xbox 360 horsepower being needed elsewhere. Whenever a battle involves vehicles, pay attention to how the areas they appear in are set up. A few examples are playing on screen now. They may sometimes have several lanes, that is, paths leading through them, but most of the time you're encouraged to move in a near straight line through narrow corridors. When I think of the best vehicle sections Halo has to offer, I think of the Silent Cartographer, the Ark, New Alexandria and the like, levels which utilise space in varied ways to provide interesting and unique challenges. In Halo 4, you'll pretty much always be driving down rigidly constructed paths which allow little room for expression, while enemies spawn directly ahead of you. As mentioned, this early portion is a better example of how it should have been handled, although it's still not perfect, and it's a shame from here the game actually mostly regresses rather than building on this early promise. In terms of AI, the Covenant in Halo 4 are incredibly stupid. They do still react to your actions every now and then and might trick you once or twice into thinking they're the same they've always been. However, much of the time they barely move around at all and seem unable to use even basic tactics. So often they'll either stand still directly in front of you or lazily strafe slightly left or right, and that's about it. You should forget about them doing anything beyond short to medium range too, because those further away usually show even less of a willingness to engage. Granted, they are more emotive than the Prometheans you'll soon be battling, but that's a pretty low bar to begin with. In short, across both level design and AI, I wonder whether Halo 4 sacrifices too much of the series' brains for beauty. After picking up your first armor ability, Active Camouflage, which I usually find to be utterly useless, you arrive in a large room housing Requiem's cartographer and hear mention of the Mantle of Responsibility for the first time.
What does it say?
Guardianship for all living things lies with those whose evolution is most complete. The Mantle of Responsibility shelters all. Very interesting.
Maybe, but it won't get us home.
You then have to cut your way through several Covenant squads on the way to a pair of power cores which need restoring to bring the cartographer back online. With that done and dusted, Chief and Cortana attempt to locate the UNSC Infinity, which has been regularly transmitting throughout the mission.
It doesn't want to triangulate Infinity's signal. Oh wait, I got it.
That can't be right. Scan again.
We've already passed through one layer of the planet's surface. It's not crazy to think that someone else made it deeper inside than we did.
You mean the planet's hollow?
I really like the look of the cartographer itself too, which is very much a shinier version of that found in previous titles. On the topic of old becoming new, you next need to make your way across a very familiar style of bridge you'll have encountered many times during Halo Combat Evolved, and especially during Assault on the Control Room. Before I talk about the sequence itself, I've a quick, probably quite stupid thought that is most likely meaningless, one that only crossed my mind, I think, when I arrived here during my third playthrough of Requiem. It's weird how much of the level seems to rapidly cycle through different facets of Combat Evolved's missions in order. Think about it, the Pillar of Autumn tasks you with exploring the cruiser of the same name, and you spend a few brief moments at the start of Requiem doing the same, albeit within the remains of the Forward Unto Dawn. Next comes Halo, which involves green hills and warthogs that, as discussed earlier, is a lot like the part which follows here. Truth and Reconciliation often encourages stealth and regularly offers up Active Camouflage, which you pick up as an armor ability during Requiem, and in the Silent Cartographer you track down the Cartographer, identical to your recent midpoint objective. Last but not least, Assault on the Control Room features a ton of bridges with an upper and lower level, very similar to the one Master Chief has arrived at by this point in the mission. That seems to be where the similarities end, but do let me know if you think they continue. Again, I must also emphasise that this isn't some clever theory about Requiem structure I'm trying to push, it's simply something which jumped out at me that I felt was worth mentioning. Right, back to events at hand. If you jump off the elevator which ferries you down to the bridge, Cortana will comment.
Scouts, fortifying the bridge below. Stay sharp.
Would it have killed you to use the elevator?
And it's always worth hanging around areas for too long or doing the unexpected, as something 343 does really well across the campaign is including incidental dialogue it's easy to miss. It is present in Bungie's entries too, but 4 and 5 especially contain a huge amount of it, and I always enjoy hearing a line or two I never knew existed during repeat playthroughs. The bridge is by far and away Requiem's best slice of uninterrupted gameplay. Enemies immediately rush you at ground level, phantoms drop off reinforcements in the distance, and banshees swoop down to fire at you. There's plenty of room to maneuver, there's a degree of verticality, and aesthetically it holds up much better than many featured later in the campaign, with bright colours and natural landscapes featured predominantly around the edges, helping soften the futuristic but visually overly busy Forerunner structures. You can even hop in a banshee and take to the skies with relative ease, as opposed to trying to take down one without damaging it during assault on the control room, which I was never any good at. This whole section takes something we've seen before and expands upon it, making it bigger and arguably better, while retaining crucial elements of the part it's based on. In a way, it's a frustrating thing to witness, as like the short Warthog sequence after Requiem's opening, it's a demonstration that at times 343 were capable of leveraging Bungie's work relatively successfully. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen enough, and examples of it become rarer and rarer the further into 4 you progress. Bridge cleared, there's a final tussle with the Covenant to contend with. The first part is another example of 343, I think, attempting to shoehorn vehicles into their level design philosophy rather than building an area around the vehicles instead. There are a couple of ghosts you can hijack, but there's little room to maneuver, which means using one of them isn't particularly satisfying. It's an on-foot section with vehicles jammed into the space for no real reason, and it doesn't work. My biggest bugbear though is with the pair of hunters you meet outside the entrance to the gigantic Forerunner spire. Hunters in Halo 4 are a letdown. They don't feature often, they're visually unappealing, and there's nothing which separates them gameplay-wise from those in other games. In fact, they're a bit of a pushover. To be fair, I understand why that's the case. Reach's hunters were absolute nightmares, walking behemoths with the ability to shred you in an instant, and so 343 perhaps overreacted a tad when balancing their own iteration, which is completely understandable. Also, their efforts after in 5 and Infinite are both great, so the hunters here I consider only to be a temporary blip. After defeating the beasts with the help of more sentinels, Chief and Cortana receive another brief transmission from the Infinity.
While you were busy, I managed to clear up another transmission from Infinity.
Sounded like he said, artifact.
I wonder if it's related to whatever the Covenant are after.
Heading inside, they are then confronted by an enemy you won't have seen yet, which appears as if from nowhere, and as a handy portal appears offering them a convenient escape route, Requiem concludes.
Cortana.
I'm picking up unknown energy signatures.
Where?
This can't be right.
Set a waypoint out of the tower. Cortana?
How did... Quick! Into the portal! Chief, go!
Forerunner begins immediately after.
What were those things?
Some sort of advanced defense AIs. Related to the Sentinels, I'm guessing, but it's hard to say without a closer look. Come on, let's figure out where that transit system dumped us.
Those things in question being the Prometheans you first encountered moments ago at the end of Requiem. Your task now is to prevent the UNSC Infinity from being sucked towards the shield world by the gravity well, which did the same to you earlier.
Those beams coming off it are creating the interference we've been experiencing. We'd have to take them out to contact Infinity.
Can you get us there?
Opening a gate to the first beam pylon. Pull me, and let's go.
Arriving in a barren, rocky landscape, the first pillar you need to destroy looms in the distance, but there is definitely trouble afoot which needs to be dealt with first. The quadrupeds which scuttle out of sight momentarily before they begin climbing down walls to attack are known as crawlers, and they will soon be joined by knights as well as watchers which spawn from them. Collectively, these 3 enemy types make up the new Promethean faction you'll be battling a whole lot during 4, and in my view, they are the worst in the franchise. I'll try to run through all my issues with them as succinctly as possible to avoid this turning into an hour-long moan fest, so do bear with me for a jiffy. The biggest problem the Prometheans have is a lack of personality, and I don't just mean in terms of them not having their own voice. That is an issue, but it is in a way understandable. Jumping ahead to Master Chief meeting the librarian during Reclaimer, it transpires that while each knight was created using a human's neural pattern, they're essentially designed to be robotic warriors with no free will of their own. That machine-like construction, their mechanical nature, is great for their original purpose of countering the Flood. They can't, after all, be turned upon death, and lore-wise they have potential, but none of that makes for great combat. Prometheans don't really react when you shoot them, they don't much emote, and in general they lack any kind of personality whatsoever. The same argument could, of course, be made of the Flood, but they nonetheless had a certain unsettling aura around them, while 4's new enemy leaves me just as emotionless as they themselves are. They usually appear out of thin air and disappear just as quickly when defeated, and in between they never make you feel anything. A grunt fleeing in terror makes you feel powerful, a brute going berserk makes you feel panicked, a horde of Flood closing in on you makes you feel petrified. The Prometheans, nothing, which is a shame, as they had potential to be much creepier than they ended up being.
Look out! Well, he's just a ray of sunshine, isn't he? From that peek under the hood, I'd say these constructs must be mimetic in nature.
Aesthetically, it's the same story. Not only do they look like generic sci-fi automatons, but their design is in keeping with the Forerunner environments themselves. It's not a big deal at this stage, but towards the end of the level, and for much of the rest of Halo 4, it certainly is, as the last thing you want from an already frustrating faction is for them to blend into many of the areas within which you encounter them. I'd hoped to never have that issue again with the series after the mess that was 3's Cortana, but hey ho, here we are. Continuing that theme, discerning enemy types is a tough task too, as different units of the same type aren't visually distinct from one another. You might be scrapping with a Crawler Prime as opposed to a Crawler, the first has spikes on its back, the second does not, or a Knight Commander instead of a Knight, the first has a bit more yellow on its back. But it's difficult to tell as the visual language used to denote rank has been reduced massively compared to earlier titles. The difference between ranks of elites, grunts and the like in Bungie's efforts were always incredibly obvious. Not so much in Halo 4, you'll likely not even realise half the time that one Promethean type differs from another. Finally, they're exasperating to actually fight. Crawlers are by far and away the least offensive of the bunch. A pack enemy which can move across areas with great speed and are able to scale walls, they provide a challenge in the mould of drones but are more entertaining to tackle. Their health pool, or the number of them which appear at a time, could probably stand to be lowered somewhat, and they can be a huge pain if they manage to get behind you, but they provide a unique enough challenge. Knights, if you'll excuse the pun, are a nightmare, as 343 has loaded them up with so many infuriating abilities. They are bullet sponges, especially on higher difficulties, with shields you might not even realise you've broken at times, such is the lack of effect. They're able to teleport to safety after taking damage, they're often equipped with weapons which can kill you in an instant, and even when you've offed one, there's still the potential for it to be revived by a Watcher. Spread those many talents across several different types of Promethean, and you'd have a varied cast which required different tactics depending on the enemy squad's makeup. Combine them all into one dreadful package, and to be frank, it makes for an absolutely excruciating experience. Watchers are the worst of the bunch, and they too come packed to the gills with irritating tricks. Among others, they can shoot you, catch grenades and throw them back at you, shield allies, and as mentioned, they can resurrect knights. All of that would at best be manageable, however, if not for the cherry on the icing of a cake made entirely out of raw sewage, which is that they can fly, they are incredibly nimble, and will actively hide when they take damage. They are the worst enemy in Halo, hands down. Put together, the Prometheans encourage a playstyle which is completely at odds with what the series should be about. So many describe Halo's combat as a dance, and that's what it should be, as you weave in and out of cover and circle arenas. With the Prometheans, there's no dance. 99% of the time, the optimal strategy is to sit at a distance and treat their ranks as particularly annoying shooting galleries. Running headfirst into battle and using your wits to survive, a risky but enjoyable plan of attack previously, will nearly always end in tears. Keeping a safe distance and chipping away at their ranks while slowly advancing instead makes skirmishes with them about as pain-free as they're ever going to be. Moving on, after destroying 3 power cores to bring down the shield protecting the first pylon, Master Chief disables it and returns to the starting area via a portal. There, the Covenant make their presence known.
I was wondering why Infinity hadn't encountered the Covenant yet.
What are they doing here?
They're heading to the second pylon as well.
That can't be a coincidence.
After heading through another portal which brings you closer to the second pylon, Forerunner begins to up the intensity with Covenant and Prometheans duking it out. Let's now talk about the Promethean weapons. Along with your recently introduced adversary, there is a brand spanking new set of 6 Forerunner guns and a grenade on offer. That may sound like nothing out of the ordinary, shooter sequels do tend to include new firearms, but it's actually a sizable change to the series' sandbox. In every other Halo title you could choose from either human or Covenant armaments, with each having their own strengths. Human weapons tend to hit their target instantly, you can pick up extra ammo for them but consequently have to reload, and they do more damage to unshielded enemies. By comparison, Covenant weapons primarily use projectiles, meaning your shots have travel time between you and your target, they've finite ammo but don't need to be reloaded, although some can overheat if fired too rapidly, and they're better at bringing down an opponent's shields than killing them outright. As the franchise has progressed, more and more exceptions to those rules have emerged, but to this day that remains their original intent. As a result, the best Halo loadouts usually always featured one of each. The most infamous example is the so-called noob combo, popularised way back when in Combat Evolved, a Covenant plasma pistol and a human precision weapon, most likely the pistol. The first allows you to quickly deplete shields before the second ends the fight moments later with a headshot. You'd assume then that Promethean weapons being a third group would usher in a seismic sandbox shift, but surprisingly that doesn't end up being the case at all. Very sensibly, 343 gives you time to become accustomed to everything new available early on. Granted, you begin Forerunner with a pistol and an assault rifle, but you will run out of ammo for them and have no choice but to grab a gun or two from the many fallen Prometheans, complete with gorgeous animation when you first pick them up. What you'll soon come to realise though, is that there's actually not a whole lot to acclimatise to, although there is a reason for that. Putting to one side the incineration cannon, which doesn't appear during Forerunner, you can try out 5 of the 6 new weapons during the mission. For all intents and purposes, the bolt shot is the new pistol, the suppressor is a new SMG, the scattershot is a new shotgun, the light rifle is a new battle rifle or carbine, and the binary rifle a new sniper rifle. Most have extra functions which make them more distinct. Being able to use the bolt shot as a shotgun by charging it is my favourite, with the light rifle's unscoped burst and scoped single shots being a close second, but none are different enough from those which already exist that they change your playstyle, like carrying human or Covenant weapons have always done. The pulse grenade can pretty much be ignored entirely, honestly. It creates an area of effect which damages shields and health, but in reality every enemy will manage to dodge it, rendering it pointless. I'm sure many of you are waiting with bated breath for my outpouring of displeasure regarding the Promethean selection at this stage, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint. I mostly enjoy using them. If I had one big criticism, it would be that their design is quite generic, like the machines wielding them, but personally, I've no qualms about utilising them when playing Halo 4. You could also argue, I suppose, that 343 could have shown a little more ingenuity when coming up with them all in the first place, as it is quite a coincidence that every Forerunner gun essentially mimics a human weapon in the sandbox. 343 did paint themselves into a corner there though. There were always going to be periods spent fighting only Prometheans, and so there definitely needed to be replacements for some of the existing firearms. When the Flood was the third faction, there was no issue. They didn't carry their own weapons, but they carried both human and Covenant guns, so you could take your pick. But in 4, that's not the case. If the Prometheans only carried weird and wonderful futuristic weapons, the complaints would have no doubt been that the existing sandbox was being taken away, making a selection like the human set, but with its own quirks, the best all-round option. Being that their original purpose was to combat the Flood, I'd always quietly hoped that we would get to do just that, using them one day, but with Infinite introducing new, and I'd say by and large better, Forerunner armament, I'd say that particular dream is now dead in the water. There's so much new stuff introduced during Forerunner to chat about that I've barely had time so far to discuss the level itself. Thankfully, there's been little of note, mostly just bog standard combat, but I'd be remiss not to mention that this mission features the first signs of one of 343's worst design habits creeping in.
I read 2 more cores on our level. them before you climb all the way up.
To enter the first pylon, you have to destroy 3 shield cores preventing access, and to enter the second, you have to destroy 3 shield cores preventing access. You'll be completing the same task multiple times within the same area, often during Halo 4, and this is the first occasion it really becomes noticeable. A counterpoint might be that Bungie sometimes did similar. Having to use explosives on vents in the engine room during Combat Evolves the Maw is a great example, but it happened far less frequently. The way 343 approaches it drags out encounters and makes proceedings feel very repetitive at times, as the setup is very nearly always the same. You kill some enemies, then press a button and some more spawn in. You press another button or similar and even more spawn in, and so on and so forth until you're done. It won't have begun to aggravate you quite yet, but give it time. Shutting down the second beam, it appears you're in a race with the Covenant.
The Covenant are moving towards the relay too.
This doesn't make any sense. Why would they care about a broadcast relay?
I'll handle them. You just find us that control node.
And racing against time to stop the Infinity.
How soon till Infinity hits the gravity well?
A minute or two max. The Covenant are making a push for something on the far side of the satellite.
After killing a few more Covenant dropped off ahead of you, you can choose to proceed through a door on your left or a door on your right. If you only played this mission once, you'd be forgiven for assuming both were the same, but they're not, and I like that. Whichever path you decide on, the environment itself will simply be mirrored, however, the encounters you face will be markedly different. To the left, the first 2 areas feature face-offs between the Covenant and Prometheans, which the latter have the upper hand in. You can choose to get stuck in immediately or hold back, and if you decide to play a more passive role, you'll likely end up having to clear up any Promethean stragglers. To the right, the Covenant are faring much better, with a kamikaze phantom wiping out any and all Prometheans for the first encounter, leaving you to fight only a familiar adversary. Similarly, in the second, the Covenant will wipe out your new foe in record time, so again you'll be going toe-to-toe with your old enemy. Both have a third segment too, but they're practically identical, which is a tad disappointing. That being said, the idea of split paths containing different challenges is something I can't remember the series really featuring before, although I could be wrong, and it's an excellent addition. No matter whether you choose to go left or right, you'll eventually reach the top and touch 2 pillars in order to open communications so you can contact the Infinity. It turns out, however, that Chief and Cortana have been tricked. The device in the centre of the room is not a satellite, but rather a cryptum, a Forerunner prison of sorts, within which lurks a powerful new nemesis, the Didact, creator of the Prometheans.
Even these beasts recognize what you were oblivious to, human. Your nobility has blinded you, as ever. The librarian left little to chance, didn't she? Turning my own guardians, my own world, against me.
I'll talk about the Didact in greater detail when we reach a later point in the campaign, but for now, I'll say that his introduction is a good one. It establishes him as a threat, the cinematography is excellent, an aspect of Halo 4 which is consistently brilliant throughout, and he leaves enough breadcrumbs that you want to find out more, but don't feel overwhelmed, which may well happen a few levels later. After a fall, Master Chief comes to with all hell breaking loose.
The Didact's leaving! We've gotta find a portal out of here before the whole network collapses!
I used to think I liked these final few minutes whizzing through canyons aboard a Ghost, and I genuinely don't know why I used to think that, because they are terrible. It pains me to say that too, as I usually love a Halo escape sequence, with the Warthog runs at the end of Combat Evolves the Maw and 3's Halo, both series highlights. With the area descending into chaos, it's time to make a quick escape, a task expedited thanks to Cortana, who uses energy from Chief's shields to overdrive the vehicle's boost. Given everything is crumbling directly ahead of you, boost is something you'll be needing to use fairly frequently too. Wonderfully, the Master Chief collection never let me forget that, thanks to the hint that I could not get to disappear for love nor money, but that is a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. You'll notice that the Ghost's boost bar in the top left no longer depletes thanks to Cortana's upgrade, and when you use it, pretty yellow trails extend behind you, your peripheral blurs, and particles stream towards the screen to signify you moving quickly. It's all a tremendous mess, and what makes it even worse is that when rocks are falling or things are exploding, the screen will violently shake, to the point it's difficult to see what's happening. Let me ask you a question. What do you think you need to be able to do most when you're trying to dodge tumbling boulders while driving at high speeds? That's right, more than perhaps any other time in Halo 4, you need to be able to see clearly. Oh, and because of all the jumps and tight corners, and shaking, it's also very easy to flip your ghost, which makes a restart necessary. I apologise if the sarcasm marinating this particular portion of the video makes for a tough listen, but at the same time, I hope it paints as clear a picture as possible of just how much I loathe this section. It requires an absurd amount of visual clutter to stand out within a game filled with visual clutter, and yet somehow Forerunner's ghost set piece manages to do just that. Heading through a portal to greener pastures provides a modicum of relief from the overwhelming frustration prior, at least. Chief managing to avoid falling over the edge of a cliff by a hair's breadth is entertaining enough, but this shot of the Infinity reaching Requiem and passing over his head is breathtaking. There's no time to lose either, with the Didact heading exactly where you'd expect as Forerunner draws to a close.
You know where he's heading.
Same place we are.
Infinity opens with Master Chief hot on the trail of the recently released Didact, who has made a beeline for the grounded UNSC Infinity.
This is Lasky to UNSC Infinity. We're up to our next bad guys down here. Does anyone read?
This is Sierra 117 of the UNSC Forerunner Dawn. We're on station, ready to assist.
Negative copy. Sounded like you said Forerunner the Dawn coming in.
Signal's bouncing in and out. I can't clean it up.
Light up their friend or foe tags. We're gonna need something to zero in on.
Lasky and crew have boots on Requiem itself, so Chief and Cortana head off to help them. There are many beautiful environments for you to feast your eyes on during 4's campaign, and the jungle you explore here to kick things off is, for my money, one of the most gorgeous of them all. Halo 3 begins with similar during Sierra 117 as you trek through lush Tanzanian surroundings, but Infinity is a step up in many regards. The fog, the particle effects, the mix of light and dark, it's an incredibly well realised, very atmospheric setting. Infinity's first half I find interesting when it comes to level design, as it shines a light on how 343 Industries often includes the right components, but in the wrong order. Sierra 117's jungle has narrow sections, but those narrow sections are accompanied by larger segments to keep gameplay interesting. You move between them at regular intervals, as you do in nearly every Bungie developed effort, and it's a huge part of what gives the series its familiar flow. Infinity actually has both too, although they're generally still more linear, but they're not blended together, which accounts for much of the difference in how enjoyable they are to play. You traverse the more cramped areas first, and we'll focus on those to begin with. While there's not a ton of room to manoeuvre, there's a decent amount of verticality to take advantage of, and it's great that the crawlers you meet also use it to try and gain the upper hand, creeping up and down the various flora in your vicinity to make life difficult. It's a shame, however, that they so regularly choose to drop down from their perch and face you head on, rather than opting to fully utilise the edge afforded to them. Beyond that, these early encounters are very much the Halo with a dash of Call of Duty affair 343 Industries so frequently offers up, until you reach this brave Marine blowing up a knight on his way out and the Promethean Vision armor ability lying nearby. If you're a fan of classic action movie series Predator, as I am, this particular twist will be right up your alley. However, instead of you being a super soldier hunted by an unstoppable alien in an unfamiliar jungle setting as you are in the film, you are a super soldier going on the offensive. I've never been a fan of equipment or armor abilities and the like in Halo, 3's one-off consumables being my favourite of the bunch, but I dislike them far less when they're tied to a specific gameplay twist. Platforming with the bullfrogs using a jetpack in Halo Reach's Exodus is a great example of that in action, and here there's another. My only wish is that the fog had perhaps obscured your long-range vision even more than it already does, as it's still fairly easy to spot the Prometheans while your new pickup is on cooldown. Doing so would make timing your attacks and hiding when the ability is recharging a more pressing concern, adding an extra layer of strategy to proceedings. During your travels, you'll also pick up Identification Friend or Foe tags, or IFF tags for short, from fallen comrades. After finding enough of them, Master Chief finally locates Lasky as well as Sarah Palmer, the first Spartan to appear in the series besides Chief himself, as part of a surprisingly muted welcome.
Sir, we'll never get the wounded back to the ship on foot. don't know if it's too soon to ask you for a favor, but we're gonna run out of breathing room here real quick. I don't suppose you're any good at clearing LZs.
On occasion. I'll send out an all-clear once the area's secured.
It's at this point, joined by a squad of Marines, that arenas begin to get bigger, and the difference in how Bungie and 343 set up their jungle experiences really becomes apparent. As mentioned previously, Bungie tends to mix the large with the small, so you move from open to open to narrow, and so on and so forth. That's not always the case, of course, but it's the rule they tend to follow. 343 prefers to expand gradually over time. Areas start out small, then get bigger, then get even bigger, with that where you push up a hill and then hold off Prometheus while Cortana unlocks a nearby door being the most substantial of them all. The thing is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with 343's approach, and if it were featured in an FPS outside of the series, I'd likely even be praising it. Intensity increases very sensibly, with you facing larger and larger groups of enemies over time while more and more weapons are gradually introduced, and as you progress, scenarios increase in complexity, for example with the Promethean Vision section earlier or this wave-based defense set piece. You'll also soon jump in a Scorpion and later a Mantis 2 to cap things off with an action-packed double crescendo. It's well designed and thoughtfully structured, but it's not structured how Halos should be, and that is, in my view, the crux of the issue. I genuinely believe that if the game had been given a makeover and was released as the first entry in an entirely new franchise, it would have been far more popular than it's ended up being, as it is by no means a bad game when its design is viewed in isolation. Also, I do love this hilltop holdout. You've plenty of choices for how to arm yourself while Marines also provide backup, and it never threatens to outstay its welcome. There's always the potential for something like it to go on and on and on, and in so many games that is precisely what happens, but this one only lasts a minute or two, which is the perfect amount. Kudos to 343 for showing restraint and not making us sit here for an age doing the same thing ad nauseum. Once the door is unlocked, Cortana apologises for a moment of rudeness as rampancy continues to affect her.
I'm sorry about back there. That hatch of security was more difficult than I expected.
It's all right.
It's not all right. Nothing about it is all right.
There is one lone on-foot battle with the Covenant and a few Prometheans during Infinity, as it's revealed that the two factions are working together. I wish this had happened sometime later. Multi-faction engagements are a huge part of Halo, and there is a single solitary level in 4 which includes them, Forerunner, the mission prior to this one. I've nothing against the team-up in principle, but there are few, if any, occasions in the entire campaign where it actually changes the mechanics of combat. You fight groups of Covenant and you fight groups of Prometheans, but almost never shall the twain meet, even if they're both present at the same time within larger arenas. This part is an early indicator of the issue. You kill all the Covenant present and the reinforcements ferried in after, and only once they've all been dispatched do the Prometheans appear. Like the problem with wider and enclosed environments discussed earlier, it's again a question of segmentation. The requisite parts needed to create something captivating are all there, but they're usually always kept separate rather than them being combined in any meaningful way. With your rocky surroundings cleared of organic and machine foes, it's time to hot-foot it to the Infinity itself.
Chief, I'm redirecting the Spartan Force to Rally Point Alpha Sierra Foxtrot. Until we catch up, you have tactical command of the forward assault force. Rendezvous with those men and take back that ship.
Yes, sir.
Good luck, Chief. Lasky out.
There's a very jarring transition here as the screen fades to black before you appear on the ground in a completely different place for the Scorpion portion of the mission. 343's fencing off of vehicle sections is prevalent throughout the campaign, and it's the third of Infinity's unholy trinity of segmentation. Now granted, there's not always a fade to black per se, but nigh on every time a vehicle is available, it is part of a very specific, very isolated proposition. With Bungie, there's mostly a but involved when they present their vehicle offerings. A Scorpion is the best way to get through this part of Assault on the Control Room, but you don't have to use it. A Mongoose is useful during these early stages of the arc, but there's plenty of other vehicles nearby if you fancy something different. With 343, the statement tends to be more definitive. This is the Ghost Escape sequence. This is the Scorpion run. This is the part where you fly a broadsword. That Bungie butt, if you'll pardon the somewhat bizarre expression, is a pivotal part of the series, and it's largely absent in 4. Vehicles exist Ubisoft not to create additional compelling options, but rather as their own one-off slice of gameplay, which is at odds with how they should be handled. Remnants, or perhaps even a remnant of it, still exist, with Reclaimer's final skirmish giving us a tantalising glimpse of what could have been throughout the rest of the campaign if 343 had focused on large-scale engagements featuring plenty of choice, but unfortunately it's something of an abnormality. The Scorpion run itself is entertaining if limited. It's atmospheric, there's plenty of things to explode, and it remains action-packed for its duration, and I'm partial to the changes made to the vehicle itself. Previous renditions of the tank have always fired in a relatively straight line, whereas Halo 4's has an arc to it, hence the height guides on the crosshair. I find it makes hitting long-range shots very satisfying, as it requires a smidgen extra brain power, although it's definitely a little less enjoyable across especially expansive areas where it's easier to miss shots, such as that just mentioned at the end of Reclaimer. All in all, Infinity's Scorpion run doesn't give you the most bang for your buck, but there's nothing wrong with it either. One problem I do have is it being used as the gameplay introduction to the Spartan 4s. While they are no Master Chief, every Spartan 4 is a force to be reckoned with, equipped with the latest and greatest, and in this game quite ugly, Mjolnir Gen 2 armour, as well as many physical augmentations designed to make them stronger soldiers. Imagine them storming onto the battlefield towards the end of a particularly tough set piece to lend Master Chief some much needed support, or making a grand entrance via a series of heroic deeds during one of Halo 4's impressive cinematics. Either would have been great. What you get instead is them sitting on the side of your tank shooting Covenant, or riding round haphazardly in a Warthog like you've seen Marines do 1,000 times before. It's quite the missed opportunity when you consider their arrival should have been a momentous occasion for the series. Once everything in your path is naught but bodies and burning wreckage, including a pair of hunters you should be able to take down with ease, you're contacted by the Infinity's captain, Andrew Del Rio.
That satellite took down the ship's defenses and is extracting data from the ship's mainframes as we speak.
Can we break the connection?
Main point of contact's on the ship's upper hull. The fastest route is through the maintenance causeway. There's a Mantis docked inside the door. Take it. You'll need the extra firepower.
Piloting the Mantis is a lot of fun, as while it has similar destructive capabilities to the Scorpion, it does offer something different. The best strategy with the Scorpion is often to stand your ground and blow things up from a distance as you cautiously trundle forward. The Mantis, by comparison, is equally deadly, but requires you be more of a brawler. You have to get in close, but you're given extra utility compared to the tank to help level the playing field. Both are intolerably slow, but you're usually so busy causing carnage that it never becomes too noticeable. I do have misgivings about this section though. Coming after the Scorpion run, another narrow blast 'em up in a slow-moving vehicle is a further unnecessary slowing of the pace, even if laying waste to Covenant and Prometheans alike is very gratifying. It is essentially exactly what you've just been doing, again. That being said, I see why it needs to exist. In an ideal world, Infinity would transition from the Scorpion run to the final part of the Mantis sequence, with you fending off attackers and destroying jammers to bring the Infinity's defences back online. It would keep things varied rather than them bordering on being repetitive. However, given this is the first time you ever pilot a Mantis, getting to grips with its controls and dealing with everything unfolding around you during the finale would be extremely overwhelming. The early stages in an enclosed space being there is important, as it gives you time to acclimatise to exactly how the vehicle functions before things begin to get out of hand. Duking it out on the ship's hull is a great way to cap things off. The skybox is incredible, with the Didact looming large overhead and later the broadswords and Mac cannon helping turn the tide, and the pace of combat attached to that spectacle matches the chaotic backdrop. Romping across the medium-sized area as you please, destroying everything which dares block your path is a nice crescendo to conclude on. On the topic of endings, Infinity draws to a close with Master Chief and Captain Del Rio meeting face to face and butting heads over how to proceed, a worrying sign of things to come.
This is a first contact scenario, Master Chief. Priority is to free Infinity from Requiem's gravity well and file a threat assessment back at FleetCom.
You mean we're leaving?
Sir, Infinity drove the Didact back. He's vulnerable.
He isn't the only one.
The story continues with Reclaimer. Captain Del Rio gives a briefing, with the UNSC hoping to destroy particle cannons guarding the gravity well which is preventing the Infinity from escaping Requiem. To say it's a tense affair would be something of an understatement.
Captain, what's Force Recon's assessment of the terrain?
I know you've been off the field for a while, Master Chief, but this is a blow-through op. Sending in a recon would just slow us down. Telemetry indicates the particle cannons are being controlled from a command post southwest of our position. Roll on that target and neutralize those guns.
Framing the mission this way makes it feel like a planned military operation, rather than the fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants escapades Halo's levels so often are. Master Chief is but one Spartan among several, working as part of a team to complete an objective, something we'd never seen him do before. It makes the Spartan 4's very underwhelming arrival towards the end of Infinity prior even more of a waste, with their grand entrance given so little fanfare you might mistakenly think them to be souped-up Marines as opposed to the super soldiers they actually are. Imagine if instead they came to the forefront here during one of the game's admittedly beautiful cinematics. It would not only make it clear who exactly they are, but also give the opening some extra oomph. The jetpack also makes its return to the series after a successful debut in Halo Reach. Given the gargantuan dimensions of the Mammoth, it's less a nice to have and more an absolutely must have. You'll be hopping on and off the absurdly proportioned vehicle regularly, and the jetpack makes doing so a less arduous process than it otherwise would be. Before Reclaimer really gets going, let's talk about the Mammoth. While it's not amazing enough that I'd ever argue it needs to be featured in every Halo, it is an entirely new concept which is used to great effect, a rarity within 4's campaign. There are occasions when 343 Industries throws in a surprise, the Mantis sequences during Infinity and Composer and the Broadsword run at the start of Midnight for example, but they're all disconnected from the experiences which surround them. The Mammoth by comparison is confidently integrated into the existing Halo framework, and it's all the better for it. The difference between them becomes evident early on as you're forced to disembark to collect a target designator from a crashed Pelican.
766, lose some altitude. You're inside the kill box.
Almost got target lock. Just a little more.
Pelican, fall back.
Hey, Pelican's down!
Considering 343's inclination towards segmentation, it must have been tempting to simply have you trundle down a set path aboard the vehicle, blasting enemies from relative safety. Reclaimer's first half being based solely around defending the vehicle with turrets and other weaponry would have been much easier to create due to the many variables removed from the equation. Credit where credit's due though, 343 went above and beyond to ensure the Mammoth functions alongside Halo's familiar gameplay loop, and it pays off. Yes, there are still moments when fighting the Covenant from a distance is the best approach, but equally, you frequently have to push on into wider areas to complete various objectives. Instead of everything being cordoned off while you progress through an overly linear environment, like say the Scorpion run in Infinity, you are able to choose how you want to use this gameplay twist to your advantage. Attacking from the Mammoth on foot is an option, using a UNSC vehicle housed within it or a Covenant vehicle on the battlefield is an option, jetpacking off it to higher ground to gain a positional advantage is an option. Unlike the other examples mentioned, Reclaimer introduces something fresh which offers up new and exciting gameplay opportunities, and that, for me, is exactly what 343 should have been trying to do with the rest of their maiden campaign as well. With the target designator retrieved and one of the particle cannons downed, your next task is to destroy 3 shield generators housed within a second wider area. Along with the Mammoth, a fresh and genuinely compelling addition, Reclaimer also successfully emulates Bungie's efforts of old when it comes to pacing. During this first half in particular, the swift transitions make that easy to spot. Quieter, narrow sections are frequently replaced by larger encounters which become more involved each time, which imbues events with the same ebb and flow as that found in the titles which precede it. Bungie's philosophy was always predominantly open to narrow, whereas 343's in 4 is usually narrow, but that's less the case here. It reminds me of how the majority of Halo 3 ODST's missions are structured, especially. Look at Uplift Reserve, look at Kazingo Boulevard, NMPD HQ, or Kikowani Station. Each of them consists of 3 arenas which escalate in challenge over time, connected by short corridors in between them, like these early parts of Reclaimer. Here you travel down a cramped path with barely any combat to the first big encounter, then another to reach the shield generators, an increase in scale, and finally down a third to reach the last, most explosive skirmish. If any criticism were to potentially be levelled at this aspect of Reclaimer, it could be that there's nothing going on in between the more substantial encounters, but there are enough bursts of combat and story beats that I've never personally found it to be an issue. The next clash with the Covenant is terrific.
Chief, get us a firing solution.
The Lich appearing above the area, the battle up the hill to reach its grav lift, blasting your way through the ship to destroy its power core. It's chaotic, vintage Halo. Again, the key here is the variety afforded to you. You can jump in the Warthog equipped with a Gauss cannon and circle the area. You can go in on foot and attempt to hijack a Covenant vehicle. You can rush straight to the grav lift and get the job done without even worrying about the enemies closer to the Mammoth. While talking about Infinity, I spoke of the idea of the Bungie butt. That is the idea that during nearly every situation they placed you in, there was normally an optimal way to proceed, but there were also plenty of other ways to approach each of them too. Up until Reclaimer, that concept is quite absent from 4, with Dawn, Requiem, Forerunner and Infinity all tending to err on the side of having a specific way to tackle different sections. Requiem, I suppose, bucks the trend once or twice, but even when it does, it presents nothing like the wealth of opportunities you could so often choose from as part of Master Chief's past adventures. However, glimpses of what could have been do begin to shine through here, and I actually consider it to be something of a false dawn first-timers might be tricked by, as the game mostly reverts to type once this outing is done and dusted. Your time with the Mammoth is practically at an end, bar a conversation between Chief and Cortana as the AI's condition continues to worsen.
They don't care about you, they replaced you!
Blast it!
It's okay.
How? How is this okay? How is putting you at risk because I can't hold it together okay?
It's from this point onwards that their side of the story really begins to pick up pace, with much of Reclaimer's closing cinematic and the opening of Next Level Shutdown focused on it. After all the fun and games and originality so far, visiting another Forerunner structure may not be an enticing prospect, but the jetpack makes it moderately enjoyable. The environment has enough verticality and space to make raining down death from above quite entertaining, and it is definitely an area designed with the equipment in mind. Out of the 8 different pieces of equipment you're able to take advantage of, it's undoubtedly the best, as it was in Reach as well, and having there be distinct parts of the campaign which get the most out of it is a smart idea, as it avoids it becoming a crutch, a get-out-of-jail-free card which is too powerful for it to always be an option. We need only take one look at Infinite and the grapple shot to see how broken a strong movement ability can quickly become. Its ridiculous utility makes it useful in basically every situation, to the extent the way you play Halo changes fundamentally to accommodate it, which is precisely how the jetpack would have ended up being used too, if it was always available. Entering the structure, there's little to do other than walk its halls using sentinels to guide you. This is the last time you explore a Forerunner environment before the scales start to tip too far in their direction for the remainder of the campaign. Regardless of what you think about their aesthetic, I'd guess that they're over-designed. A good balance has generally been maintained between them and natural areas up until now. Come the end of Reclaimer, that will no longer be the case. Shutdown is dominated by Forerunner architecture. Composer unfolds in an orbiting science station which is admittedly human-built but doesn't look that dissimilar, and Midnight again consists mostly of Forerunner structures. They work better when used to break up the natural to provide a palate cleanser, as they do here and have done for much of 4 so far, but that won't be the case moving forwards. After a short stroll, you'll come across a terminal Cortana uses to take the remaining particle cannons offline, after which she suddenly disappears. Searching for her, you arrive at Halo 4's infamous lore dump, dished out by a Forerunner named the Librarian, once the Didact's wife.
Who are you?
I am what remains of the Forerunner, once known as the Librarian. My memories were retained to assist humanity on their path to the mantle. Though sadly, that plan is now at risk.
To summarise her ensuing explanation, as ancient humans spread across the stars, the Forerunners fought them, with the Didact leading their war effort. It turned out humanity wasn't aggressively expanding, but were fleeing the Flood, and refusing to yield the mantle of responsibility, that is, the role of protecting all life in the galaxy. The Didact decided to use a device known as the Composer to digitize humans and turn them into Prometheans. This was a perfect solution, as it both punished them and turned them into soldiers the Flood were unable to assimilate. The Forerunners then took the Composer from him before he could convert all of humanity and imprisoned him on Requiem until he was released towards the start of the campaign. As if that wasn't enough, the Librarian also reveals that humanity's destiny was to some degree preordained.
I hid seeds from the Didact. Seeds which would lead to an eventuality. Your physical evolution. Your combat skin? Even your ancilla, Cortana? You are the culmination of 1,000 lifetimes of planning.
She also uses the genetic template implanted thousands of years ago to accelerate Master Chief's evolution, making him invulnerable to the effects of the composer. There's not enough footage to talk over here, so I'm going to use clips from the terminals hidden within each level, which I'll also cover momentarily. I dread to think about how many times I played through 4 over the last year or two, and yet my still being worried about whether I'm explaining any of this well is testament, I think, to how poorly this exposition is handled. You only met the Didact himself a mission and a half ago at the end of Forerunner and have barely seen him since, and now, out of nowhere, a huge amount of backstory and several new concepts are introduced all at once. Ancient humanity's history, the composer and the Prometheans, the Gene Song and humanity's destiny, these could have all been individual reveals, such is their importance to the series' wider story. Instead, you've no choice but to do your best to get your head around all of them at the same time. For those familiar with Halo's lore in all its forms, there's a lot to digest and discuss, and they'll probably enjoy doing so. For those who stick only to the games, I guess a large percentage of the series' audience, there's mountains to take in and not enough time to properly mull it over. There are also the aforementioned terminals which elaborate on that just discussed. When watched in one go upon completing Halo 4, they are fantastic and add extra details that go a long way towards contextualizing events. However, when discovered naturally as you progress, their fragmentation dampens their impact, and I'm sure there are those who discovered a few of them, or one, or none, lessening their effectiveness for many even further. I've tried to come up with a solution myself for how to better work them into the game, but have so far struggled to come up with anything remotely clever. What is up for debate here isn't so much, is the story actually any good? That is, of course, for the individual to decide, and to share my opinion, I think it had potential if 343 had properly followed through on it across multiple titles instead of continually course correcting. What should be questioned is whether that story is presented in a manner which makes it accessible to both those who are fully immersed in Halo's wider story and those who have little knowledge of series lore beyond the games. I'd say the former group will probably be okay, while the latter will find themselves swamped. You need only look at Master Chief and Cortana's portion of the narrative for an example of a storyline being handled well. Information is shared gradually over time, and it results in a satisfying arc for both characters which can be enjoyed by everyone. The same cannot be said for the Forerunner side of the story, which, let's be frank, is a bit of a mess. Also, just to get my 2 cents in quickly before moving on, I wish the Forerunners had remained shrouded in mystery following the conclusion of the trilogy, as not knowing their backstory or their history made them particularly intriguing, and I really dislike the idea of humanity's progress being predestined too. It is unnecessary. Still reeling from the shed load of lore dumped on you, you retrieve Cortana, fend off Prometheans, and have a quick catch-up.
Chief, what happened? Your bio readings are all over the map.
It's a long story, but I know what the Didact's after.
I know that part. The librarian filled me in when she snatched me from the system.
But what I don't know is what she did to you.
Reclaimer's finale awaits you on the other side of a portal, and honestly, it is Halo 4's pinnacle, the tippy top. It's exactly the sort of large-scale encounter 343 should have replicated across the rest of the campaign. It's the logical extension of the earlier outdoor battles, and is Halo in its purest form. Allies and enemies whiz across the battlefield, Covenant lurk in the distance, the Infinity looms overhead, and again you're able to tackle it all exactly how you see fit. It's another clear demonstration that 343 Industries had it in them to recapture some of the Halo magic so prevalent throughout the rest of the series, and it's a crying shame we didn't get a lot more of it. Imagine if instead of ending with a Ghost escape sequence that is fine, Forerunner ended with something like this. Or if Infinity's Scorpion run gave us similar to open things up before the Mantis section capped things off. There are so many places 4 could benefit from this increased scale to take the edge off the linearity, which is designed well enough but unfortunately comprises a massive amount of the experience. Reclaimer's last slice of uninterrupted gameplay is a short trek up a hill, probably in a Scorpion, although not definitely, to destroy 2 more shield generators. Carrying vastly improved weaponry compared to earlier, or driving a Scorpion, they shouldn't prove too tricky to demolish either. With nothing left to block your path, you're able to use the target designator to lay waste to the grav lift holding the Infinity in place. Back on the ship, the effects of impending rampancy on Cortana appear to be worsening.
Nav, as soon as we know we're airtight, I want a course laid into Carenay Station. Com, prepare a warning beacon.
I will not allow you to leave this planet!
Cortana.
I didn't mean to.
And as Reclaimer ends, Master Chief and Captain Del Rio have a disagreement over what to do next. Chief is willing to sacrifice everything to prevent the Didact leaving Requiem and unleashing his wrath on humanity a second time, whereas Del Rio's primary concern is getting the ship to safety as soon as possible.
The Didact has to be stopped. If you won't do that, I will.
I am ordering you to surrender that AI!
No, sir.
Lieutenant! Arrest that man!
Captain!
Arrest him!
Captain!
Get word to Earth that trouble is coming. Cortana and I will do what we can back here.
Shutdown is up next. Cortana monologues about an artificial sun and the nature of being alive, no doubt prompted by worries regarding her own mortality.
But for all that, I'll never actually know if it looks real. If it feels real. Before this is all over, promise me you'll figure out which one of us is the machine.
At the end of Reclaimer, Cortana struggled to contain her emotions, and while they are now under control, it's obvious how much her outburst has affected her. She has been pragmatic about her condition from minute one, but now it seems the reality of the situation has truly set in. Master Chief remains indifferent, awkwardly fiddling with his assault rifle in the background. At surface level, Chief is man and Cortana machine, but how uncomfortable and emotional Cortana makes the Spartan serves to blur the line between the two. Part of his unwillingness to engage, I'm sure, also stems from his continued belief that a solution to the problem can and hopefully will be found, or him being in denial. After a brief exchange with Lasky, you enter a hangar housing the Pelican he's prepared for you, and there is a surprising amount of detail packed into this one area if you take the time to have a good look around. Along with regular announcements over the tannoy, including one from Captain Del Rio, there are several terminals you can interact with, and a lot of Marines, Spartan 4s and the like who react to your presence. Their dialogue is fantastic, and while there are far too many examples to list them all, I will highlight a couple. One of my favourites is mention of another Spartan.
I spotted for a Class 2 back in 39. 0058. You know her? She was an absolute beast with a sniper.
If you are someone well acquainted with series lore, you'll recognise 058 as the number for Linda, a very special Spartan who is a member of Blue Team led by Master Chief. The strangest of them all is chatter between two very ordinary looking workers nearby.
I think something's up.
What?
I think there's gonna be a war with an alien they awoke from an ancient slumber.
Oh, that is stupid.
I know.
I mean, I don't know much. I mostly just load crates, but that is stupid.
You know what? There's one thing my grandpa told me. Never awaken an alien from an ancient slumber.
I only found out recently, but the pair are voiced by US TV host Conan O'Brien and his longtime collaborator Andy Richter. Speaking of secrets, you can take this opportunity to go on a rampage if you're feeling mischievous. The concept is nothing new, you can choose to slaughter your allies whenever you want in any Halo title, but it's somewhat different on this occasion as it's a chance to test your mettle against fellow Spartans, albeit Spartan 4s, as waves of reinforcements are sent in to take you down. Towards the end of the battle in the original release, Sergeant Johnson would sometimes spawn to thwart you, but I've been reliably informed that he no longer appears under any circumstances in the Master Chief collection. Of course, the prospect of flying a Pelican means you might ignore the interesting conversations, decide not to go rogue, and rush straight through the hangar to the vehicle, and who could blame you? After all, the game's lineup of vehicles is desperately anemic, with many favourites missing and only the Mantis and Pelican added, so the Pelican is a rare treat, a potential diamond buried in 4's fairly rough vehicular landscape. This isn't its first appearance as a pilotable vehicle in Halo per se. An Easter egg in Reach's New Alexandria also allows a Pelican to be flown, but it is the first time it's part of a campaign proper. Taking off is certainly exciting, and the setup for the rest of Shutdown sounds promising too.
Contact. Didact dead ahead.
How do we get inside those shields?
Marking 2 of the larger facilities on your HUD. They're acting as traffic control for resources moving to and from the satellite. If we disrupt their communications, I can forge an override code and convince it to lower those defenses.
With Forerunner structures hanging in mid-air against the clouds and the Didact's cryptum floating menacingly in the distance, the unusual premise and striking backdrop will likely be more than enough to foster a sense of anticipation, the feeling that you're about to play something noteworthy. Unfortunately, the action in question isn't altogether brilliant. In fact, massively disappointing is a more apt description. When it comes to the Pelican, there are 2 main sources of frustration, the vehicle itself and the way the mission is structured. Let's talk about what it's like to use it while travelling to the first tower. In short, piloting the Pelican is desperately uninteresting. For starters, there is no challenge involved in manoeuvring it whatsoever, with it handling similarly to Halo 3 ODST's Banshee. It has no forward momentum without your interference, which means if you take your hands off the wheel, so to speak, it will hover in place, trivialising combat to an absurd degree. You needn't do more than strafe left and right while aiming. Even if you do somehow struggle to handle it, and I genuinely do not see how that could happen, the encounters you face are also about as uninspiring as they could possibly be. A number of phantoms float near the entrance to your destination, and they provide basically no resistance at all, shooting but rarely bothering to do much else. Honestly, I felt more danger climbing out of bed. You do have a machine gun and a Spartan laser you can dish out damage with, but neither offers anything unique, with the result being that you tend to sit back mindlessly blasting away, brain barely switched on, until the incredibly listless Covenant forces have all met their maker. It's enough to make you want to attack the Didact head-on in a vain attempt to find some fun. That is a decision that won't end too well, however. Heading inside the first of the 2 facilities you need to tackle, Cortana's issues continue.
This tower's directing traffic to the Didact satellite through a carrier wave generator located somewhere inside. Of course, if Infinity wasn't on its way back to Earth, locating and disabling it would be trivial.
We can handle it.
That's hardly the point, is it?
And this section is rubbish. If you are an avid watcher of my channel, or maybe even a disinterested one, you might have heard me speak before of my intense, burning hatred of Halo 2's gondolas and assorted slow-moving platforms. There is a reason they are present everywhere in 2 and then pretty much nowhere else after, and that is because they are terrible. 343 Industries clearly didn't entirely agree though. I actually don't hate the design of the 2 arenas on either side you're forced to disembark to along the way, as they offer space and verticality which are both perfect for the jetpack you begin the level equipped with. That being said, you've just indulged in a dreary Pelican section, then you've had to sit on a slow-moving platform, and now you have to fight through 2 practically identical sections which are extremely visually repetitive. The Pelican, I think, is meant to act as a break between the various towers, but because it's not at all enjoyable, you end up with different types of boredom being stacked upon one another. Infinity and Reclaimer Prior are action-packed and varied throughout, and Shutdown then brings you back down to Earth with a very hard bump. By the time you reach the carrier wave generator, you'll be more than ready to do anything else, but you first have to step into it so that Master Chief's shield can emit an EMP to disrupt it. I'm always reminded of Combat Evolved's 2 Betrayals when playing Shutdown, particularly while visiting this tower. In 2 Betrayals, you're also introduced to a new vehicle, although you can pilot it earlier if you know how, and you then have to journey to multiple locations to take down phase pulse generators using your shields. Once or twice when you do so, sentinels will immediately appear prior to your shields recharging to make life hell. Guess what happens in this tower after doing the same thing? That's right, Watchers appear immediately prior to your shields recharging to make life hell. When the Watchers have been dealt with, you are rewarded with a ride all the way back to where you started. Oh, joy of joys.
The mantle of responsibility for the galaxy shelters all human, but only the Forerunners are its masters.
Cortana, where's this coming from?
Where's what coming from?
The Didact's voice.
I'm not picking up anything, Chief.
He's there. Keep trying.
Back in the Pelican, Tower number 2 awaits, as does another mid-air skirmish which is exactly the same as the last one. This is the second problem with how Shutdown uses the Pelican, or rather, how it doesn't. Even while preparing to move on to pastures new, Bungie continued to innovate as they worked on Halo Reach. One of my favourite examples is New Alexandria, a very unique proposition. You had to fly between 3 different locations and disable communications jammers at each, with the order sometimes changing between playthroughs, and you had to complete various side objectives which were selected randomly from a pool of 12. Set against a city in ruins, the Covenant continues to glass. It is one of the most memorable missions in the series. The only thing Shutdown shares with New Alexandria is that it also features a beautiful setting and that you have to visit 3 different locations. While there is some choice, the order you take on the first 2 towers is up to you. That's as unique as proceedings get. When playing New Alexandria, you never quite know what is coming next, as you race to destroy the jammers and complete side objectives while everything burns around you. It's dynamic, it's haunting, and most importantly, it's entertaining. When playing Shutdown, you fly to each tower, take part in short-lived dogfights, and that's it. There are so many ways 343 could have improved things. Perhaps you had to pick up troops and ferry them into battle. Perhaps a few other Pelicans joined you for bigger firefights. Hell, even some Covenant ground troops guarding each entrance would have made events slightly more engaging. It's such a frustrating thing to witness, as the potential is near limitless. 343 had a blank slate to utilise as they saw fit. Instead, what we get is the absolute bare minimum, which makes the Pelican's grand entrance about as depressing as it could possibly be. Entering the second tower, you've another job to do.
Chief, there's a lot more comm traffic passing through this tower than just what's servicing the Didact satellite. These systems use data attenuators to regulate the flow of communications. Destroying those would drown out the tower's transmissions. The tower's instructions to the Didact shield would be drowned in yours.
This area is arguably worse than the last, although opinion will vary. It's another case of 343 making you do the same thing multiple times to solve a larger problem, although in fairness it's not the worst example included in Halo 4. That dubious honour goes to Forerunner and its power cores, with you having to destroy what begins to feel like a never-ending parade of them. It's something included in every 343 developed Halo title, and it is always awful. Like the first tower, again, there's nothing egregious about the combat you indulge in, but it is, in my mind, by far the worst example of how visually cluttered Halo 4's Forerunner environments can become. I'm going to pause the footage for a second now to show you exactly what I mean. Look at this scene. The ramp in the bottom left is visible enough, as is the walkway and accompanying crawlers in the bottom right. Trying to discern how everything beyond them connects and can be traversed even when looking at a still image is a tough task. You can make out individual segments, but even that is tricky. Now imagine trying to navigate all of it with speed and accuracy, especially the first time you arrive here. Then throw in enemies who practically blend into the background. It's like the Flood in Halo 3's Cortana all over again, except this time with the colour grey. Say what you want about the stark, brutalist design of Forerunner architecture in earlier titles, the makeup of your immediate environment is usually obvious. Granted, you can still get lost exploring the wider map. The silent cartographer is the one that always leaves me in a muddle, but it's not overly difficult figuring out how everything directly in front of you combines. With larger areas like those in 4 comes an increase in complexity, no one can deny that, but consequently extra care should be put into helping you understand their layout. I'd go so far as to say that 343's Forerunner aesthetic often serves to do the exact opposite. As you move at speed, everything blurs together to create a visual catastrophe, an unappealing grey mess which is usually a nightmare to navigate. Back on board the Pelican, Master Chief and Cortana race towards the third and final tower as a defiant Didact prepares to leave Requiem.
Do you truly believe these theatrics can prevent my departure? Embrace your sad fate and retain your nobility. I am already beyond you.
He knows what we're trying to do. If we try to get too close to that ship, we're dead. I have an idea. Head for that waypoint.
The concluding on-foot affair after is Shutdown's best, thanks to its simplicity. Unsurprisingly, it features only Covenants with not a Promethean in sight, and it's easy to navigate, which at this stage is a godsend. Each portion of the area is laid out in a way which straight away makes sense thanks to how they're separated, in stark contrast to that discussed a minute or two ago. I also want to give a shout out to the music, as the track This Armor which plays here is one of the best on the soundtrack. It's urgent and alien in equal measure, and could not fit this segment any better. Unfortunately, I can't play it, as including in-game clips or backing tracks using Neil Davidge's portion of the soundtrack has resulted in several copyright claims. Flying around in a Banshee after I like well enough too. Mostly it's a retread of what you've just been through at ground level, except you're able to take to the sky. Despite it not being anything special in and of itself, it is considerably more riveting than any moment spent flying around earlier, which is less praise for this part, and more a damning indictment of 343's use of the Pelican. Shutdown ends on a high note at least. Although Cortana had managed to pull herself together by the time the mission's opening rolled around, here she again loses control.
They're mine. Now to imprison them!
What are you doing?
I can't resist his Prometheus! My thunder mostly imprisoned me!
And as the Didact begins his escape, Chief launches himself into mid-air in pursuit, something of a series staple.
Cortana, what's happening?
I don't know.
Hang on!
Composer begins with the Didact en route to the Ivanov station. The orbital research facility houses the Composer, which he hopes to get his hands on again, so that he can continue digitizing humans and turning them into Prometheans. It's also located close to Installation 03, which is where the UNSC first found the device.
A halo?
Installation 3. It's where Infinity found the coordinates for Requiem.
Then why are they bypassing it?
Because the Composer's not on the ring.
Master Chief then commandeers a Lich, and I honestly feel like this entire opening is one big tease. You never get to visit the Halo in question, nor do you see Chief taking out the Covenant, the two most fascinating things about these cinematics. The Ivanov is a strong setting I'll talk more about shortly, but considering the Composer was discovered on the installation, you'd think leaving it there and setting the mission on the Ringworld would be a much more compelling prospect. I mean, the series is named Halo. Regardless, after a chat with Dr. Sandra Tilson, a xenoarchaeologist, Cortana has another breakdown which leads to a crash landing.
Correct your approach.
Yes, well, he also said he works better alone. I can see why you chose him, Catherine.
Cortana.
I'm your greatest achievement and you detest
Pull up! Now!
Waking aboard a base already overrun by Covenant, Dr. Tilson contacts Chief again, with the Spartan promising to help with the evacuation effort. Composer is divided into thirds, with it featuring 2 extended on-foot sections followed by a Mantis set piece at its end. The first segment especially is amazing. As you traverse the station, NPCs, both Marines and researchers, are cut down by Covenant, or will join you if you're quick enough saving them. A new weapon is introduced in the form of the sticky detonator. This is the only time it appears during the campaign, and it being projectile-based makes utilising it successfully very satisfying. Even the level design is spot on, with there being multiple angles of approach and a real sense of you moving through a well thought out, cohesive environment. A particular highlight is you fending off aggressors while trying to raise a barricade to stop them entering. It may remind you of a certain section from Halo 3's Crow's Nest, and that's because they are very much alike, although that doesn't make it any less entertaining. For those who fancy a good scrap and don't wish to end things too early, you can also elect to do nothing, which leads to Phantoms endlessly ferrying enemies in. The view is also spectacular. One of the few areas where 343 Industries has always matched, or perhaps sometimes even bettered, Bungie is in their ability to craft stunning skyboxes, and Installation 03 looming large behind an asteroid belt is evidence of that. You may never step foot on Halo itself, which again is irritating, but it's a constant presence nonetheless. I also cannot overstate what a huge difference the amount of AI populating the station makes too. It's possible to fight alongside a group during the first encounter, you meet another for the barricade defense, and stumble upon a third here as you shoot your way to the top of the facility. Even the scientists get involved once you've ascended, although they don't last long against the 2 hunters which have taken up residence in their lab. Halo 4 already includes the classic fend the Covenant off as they attack a human ship or orbital platform level in the form of Dawn, one of the game's best outings, but 343's second stab at the concept is the more gripping, thanks to how dynamic events are and the scale, both inside and outside the sprawling site. It's relentlessly paced in the best way possible, and one of the very best parts of 4's campaign. A couple of cool details here before we move on. Taking the time to have a look around the lab, which you may not do, and understandably so, as there is an air of urgency about proceedings. There are terminals detailing the various experiments undertaken at the Ivanhoe. There's also Installation 03's activation index. How the UNSC managed to secure it, I do not know. If you're a Halo superstar like I am in my own mind, you'll leave the many scientists you managed to save to meet Dr. Tilson face to face.
If we can't move the composer, we have to make sure the Didact can't either.
Oh, wait. We have years of work invested here.
Inventory lists 7 excavation-grade Havoc mines. Just one of those would turn this base into a piñata.
Crossing the outdoor area, housing the composer, and an absolute shed load of allies, your next task is to reactivate defense turrets, which will aid in the evacuation. The Didact contacts Chief again too.
Your singular lab will be preserved and studied. Once your composition has been completed.
Does anyone else find it absolutely bananas that the series' new villain, an apparently fearsome foe introduced proper for the first time in 4, barely appears at all? Since you encountered him at the end of Forerunner, which did a good job of setting him up, he has spoken to you at regular intervals, but you've never actually seen him again. Dawn and Requiem occur prior to the Didact's reveal, and in Infinity, Reclaimer, Shutdown and Composer you only hear him speak, which means there are just 2 levels he features in the flesh. I've done the maths, if you can call it that, and across those 2 missions he has roughly 6 minutes of screen time, a paltry amount all things considered. There are the terminals too, I suppose, but I don't count those as much. In fairness, his absence isn't something I paid much attention to in the past, but after playing through the game twice while preparing to make these videos, it became very noticeable by this point in the story. The Didact has never been a villain I've been particularly passionate about, despite him having some potential, and in the present, with more perspective, I think him being practically non-existent for a huge chunk of 4 is why. It's difficult to get emotionally invested in the struggle against an antagonist you scarcely meet. In gameplay terms, this second third is not quite as bombastic as that which precedes it, but there's still plenty of pluses. For one thing, it's a visual treat, with the smoke and fire and lighting really showing off how graphically ahead of its time 343's maiden outing could be. It's a lot moodier than earlier sections too, helping give the impression that the Ivanhoe is buckling under the strain of the Covenant's assault. Also, ejecting Covenant from the airlocks before they're able to reach you is good clean fun, as is fighting them and them alone for Composer's duration. That hasn't happened since Requiem, and since the Prometheans entered the fray, the campaign has been awash with them, with Shutdown one of the worst offenders. Midnight follows Composer, and that also features only Prometheans, and so this palette cleanser is much needed, although you could argue it only serves to highlight how much more engaging taking on the Covenant is. That rings true in terms of weaponry as well. Promethean guns aren't available, nor are they a necessity due to the Covenant being easier to kill and thus requiring less ammo. In general, there's a much better flow to combat. A pair of invisible elites guard the defense grid's console, but they shouldn't cause you too much trouble. With the cannons activated, it's time to deal with the Composer itself, and again, do also note the breathtaking skybox.
I'm here. Any luck?
Cortana's bringing the defense grid online now.
Okay, that's it.
I hear it. We'll broadcast the final evac orders.
The nuke?
We're rigging it now. Meet us back on the upper platform and we'll help you get it to the artifact.
There are a few more Covenants who need to be dealt with as you retrace your steps, however they are but stragglers in the grand scheme of things. The big battle begins soon after. Holding off waves of Covenant in a Mantis is decent enough, and a much better use of the vehicle than during Infinity. Towards the end of that mission, you plod down a long path frustratingly slowly, a great introduction to the Mantis as it lets you get acquainted with its functions, but annoying in that it comes immediately after a similarly laboured Scorpion segment. At the end, it opens up and becomes a defense set piece, which is where it shines, and that's all you get here in Composer. The Mantis's extreme lack of speed becomes way less of an issue when you're circling round a medium-sized circular environment of your own accord, and with so many distractions constantly appearing, you're unlikely to get bored. As the action continues to intensify, you take on ground troops, then ground vehicles, and finally Banshees, and so even if you're someone like me who could take or leave the UNSC's new vehicle, there's much enjoyment to be found. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of Chief Cortana and Dr. Tilson, the Didact eventually manages to get his hands on the Composer. The trio make panicked last-minute plans to try and stop him, but it's all in vain as he uses the device. Dr. Tilson, all of the researchers nearby, and presumably every other human left within the station are composed, reduced to nothing but data which could then be used to create Prometheans. It's one of the darkest scenes in the entire series, and I love it. Master Chief thankfully survives thanks to the Librarian making him almost completely immune to the Composer's effect when the pair met during Reclaimer. He tries to get Cortana to focus on the job at hand, but with the AI on her last legs following repeated malfunctions during the level, she can focus only on her own fate as Composer concludes.
They'll pair you with another AI. Maybe even another Cortana model if Halsey lets them.
That's not going to happen.
It won't be me. You know that, right?
Midnight gets going with Master Chief and Cortana in pursuit of the Didact, who is now in possession of the Composer following his victory on the Ivanov station. Something brand new follows.
Broadsword's hull integrity is stable. We'll be safe as long as we stay below the Didact shield.
Where's the Composer?
Close. I should be able to guide us to it.
You have not been composed. Such an observation should not have been possible.
Nowhere is the duality of linearity more prevalent in Halo 4 than during this broadsword run. The first time, or perhaps the first few times you experience this 5 or so minute section of Midnight, it's hard not to get very excited by this homage to Star Wars, irrespective of whether you've enjoyed the rest of the game or not. You're piloting a new vehicle, blasting down a trench as fast as you can while dodging or blowing up the many turrets firing at you, boosting through tight gaps as the environment shifts around you. 117, one of the soundtrack's best pieces, also swells in the background to dramatic effect, while constant radio chatter keeps you informed of what's happening elsewhere. It's big, it's bombastic, it's suitably epic, and it sets the stakes high. It's a mission Chief may genuinely not return from. It's akin to the visceral set pieces so often found in the Call of Duty series and other shooters of its ilk, an assault on the senses it's hard not to be captivated by. The thing with big set pieces like those, though, is that their impact soon lessens the more you play them, and that is also true of Midnight's. Flying the broadsword is captivating to start, that cannot be denied, but like so much of Halo 4, it's indicative of a shift away from the complexities of earlier titles. Halo Reach introduced space combat midway through Long Night of Solace somewhat successfully, but even the scant freedom you were given then is gone. Mechanically, Midnight is closer to Star Fox on the Super Nintendo than it is a modern Halo title, with you being funneled at pace down a strict path you are barely able to deviate from. Enemies, and describing turrets in such a way is a stretch, always appear in the same place and are more an inconvenience than anything else, with any deaths tending to be the result of distraction rather than trepidation. For all intents and purposes, it's an elaborate 3D auto-scroller which follows a rigid structure, and that becomes especially evident over repeat runs, during which you'll quickly realise that nothing changes between them. In essence then, for all its grandeur, it represents the complete opposite of what I believe makes Halo so infinitely replayable. The series has its scripted moments and set pieces, but the majority of the time, the vast sandbox afforded to you means variety is still present within them. The best points of comparison are Halo Combat Evolved and Halo 3's Warthog runs. Both are tightly directed and take you down a precise, action-packed path, and they both occur at the end of their respective campaigns. At a glance, Midnight is no different, but upon further inspection, it lacks the special sauce of Master Chief's earlier exploits, that is, the variables within those sequences. While speed is encouraged, you can somewhat move at your own pace and can even leave your Warthog if you deem it necessary, although it's not advised. You'll also drive past lots of enemies along the way, and though it's unlikely you'll have to worry about them too much, they do react differently every time and will sometimes even prove to be an obstacle. Playing either of them back to back will often result in a different experience, even if only slightly, whereas Midnight is broadly the same every time. In isolation, 343 Industries' offering is well made, and I'd even go so far as to say it's the most compelling vehicle section in the game. However, as is the story with so many of them, and this is an important distinction to make, it's not one that altogether suits the Halo series. I also wish this part came at Midnight's end rather than at its beginning. It works decently enough where it is, but given how disappointing Master Chief's confrontation with the Didact is, and don't worry, we will get to that, it would have helped Halo 4 finish on a high note rather than with an underwhelming QuickTime event. Fleeing as the nuke's timer ticked down would make for an engaging final flourish, rather than you pressing a couple of buttons and being left thinking, oh, is that it? I have been a negative Norman so far, so here is some praise. The way the soundtrack seamlessly intensifies as you enter open space to the sight of the UNSC Infinity and other ships appearing as Earth looms in the background is absolutely tremendous.
Infinity, Didact just closed off our entrance to the composer.
We can try punching a hole in that hull plating, but Infinity won't be able to get a clear shot with all that black.
We'll take care of the guns.
As with that which came before, this portion of the level is spectacular, if mechanically uninteresting. With all but one of the cannons you need to destroy being dotted round the outside of the arena, you'll probably end up ignoring most of its middle, which you'd think 343 would want to utilise to provide a different challenge. Instead, it's easier to fly in a tight circle round the outside, dodging turrets and shooting orange orbs like you did earlier. I find it funny as the environment itself is one which should push you to follow a less narrow path, but because all your objectives are located at its edge, it turns into a mini trench run of sorts regardless. With the cannons dealt with, the Infinity is able to blow a hole in the mantel's approach so that Chief and Cortana can continue on, but after crash landing, the pair have no choice but to venture deeper on foot. It's abundantly clear at this stage that Cortana is running out of time.
Chief, I know I'm supposed to know what to do, but...
We'll have to deploy the warhead manually. How and where?
I always know what to do. I always know what to do. Just give me a second.
Keep scanning for the composer. We'll figure it out on the way.
Putting to one side the story beats, which are outstanding throughout, the gameplay from this point onwards is rough. For those of you who have played Halo 5 Guardians, this first half of your time spent indoors is reminiscent of The Breaking, the mission I think is Halo's absolute worst. The two share much of the same DNA, with this portion of Midnight feeling like something of a prototype for it. Look at the arena in the background here, for example. I'm sorry to keep harping on about Call of Duty, but it is exactly how Call of Duty sets up its encounters, with cover for you to duck behind plonked all over the place without any rhyme or reason. Enemies also spawn straight ahead of you, and only straight ahead of you, which makes every firefight a war of attrition, as you slowly progress forward through shooting galleries where taking cover feels like less of a choice and more of a necessity. You cannot dive in and begin moving around arenas less uniformly, as there are so many aggressors packed into every space that doing so is a death wish even on lower difficulties. After the first few encounters, you come across a room filled with weapons as Cortana contacts you while mistakenly labelling herself as her creator, Dr. Catherine Halsey. It's an attempt by 343, I'm sure, to encourage you to play your way, but with the issues already outlined so abundant, the only correct choice is grabbing ranged weapons. I tried diving in with the gravity hammer, but it and other short-range options simply are not suited to the way skirmishes are structured. The best approach is to kill some Prometheans and edge closer to your objective, kill some more and do the same, and so on and so forth. There is nothing wrong with that in isolation, and it makes sense considering the Didact should be well protected and getting to him should be tough. However, with there being no Covenant featured at all, this is the single level they're entirely absent from, and with the Prometheans encouraging only this cautious playstyle, things can begin to drag. If you are one of those who is already losing patience, you're in for a nasty shock as it gets even worse.
Reinforcements! Hold them off while I locate the composer!
3 minutes. You spend 3 minutes here stuck doing almost nothing as crawlers lazily amble their way over to you. Most can be taken out before they even reach you, and it kills any sense of pacing Midnight had up to this point stone dead. It's unneeded padding that should have been cut, and it adds nothing of value whatsoever. At least once you're done, the endgame begins, as Master Chief and Cortana reach the composer and the Didact.
Activity! Significant slip space event building under the composer.
He's powering it up.
Cortana then splits herself, with the goal being to use her copies and their rampant personality spikes to overwhelm the composer's shields so that Chief can reach the Didact. What does that mean for you? Well, for a third time, you're exposed to a mixture of amazing atmosphere and mediocre gameplay. You have to reach 2 beams housed in areas which are laid out practically identically and contain mostly the same enemies, and you have to traverse 2 similar beam-free platforms as well. It's yet another example of you being made to do the same thing multiple times to achieve a single objective, as you move between 4 platforms which are nigh on exact copies of one another. This is the last substantial piece of gameplay before the campaign concludes, and looking at it particularly in those terms, it is a letdown. You've already spent time fighting the Prometheans prior to arriving here, so they're not too interesting at this stage, and now you'll begin to get environmental deja vu too. It's a never-ending procession of repetition. You'd have hoped for more, what with your later confrontation with the Didact being so disappointing, but scant reward is offered. As it stands, Midnight starts out strong and then flounders the further you progress, and it's why I think the broadsword run desperately needed to be at its end to vastly improve pacing. That being said, while the combat is as bland can be, with nothing introduced to differentiate engagements beyond those in any other level, or the rest of Midnight, 343 does still succeed in elevating your push to the Didact through other means. Arrival is the perfect choice of backing track, with it lending a real sense of finality to events. I've not been overly complimentary of Halo 4 or 5's soundtracks in the past. I think they stray too far from the series' trademark sound, although 343 vastly improved with Infinite, but Arrival and 117, which played earlier, are 2 of Halo 4's best songs, and they're both used to great effect during their respective parts. The environment itself is also the most visually distinctive of all of 343's Forerunner efforts, a cavernous expanse bathed in orange light, its centre pointed menacingly at Earth. Cortana being on her very last legs also adds weight. Knowing you're so close to achieving your goal of stopping the Didact, but at the same time starting to understand that your companion probably won't be leaving with you, fosters conflicting emotions, a bittersweet feeling. There is a nice touch with regards to this right before you meet the Didact too. Cortana is barely functioning at all, but she still urges Chief on via the objective readout on his hub, which says, "It's alright, but you must hurry." Even though she's so close to death, she still finds a way to comfort and encourage him. On the subject of deaths, with the 2 beams turned off, 4 platforms navigated, and countless Prometheans dispatched, at long last Master Chief comes face to face with the Didact for a second time. Remember, this is their first proper meeting since the Didact was revealed at the end of Forerunner a good while ago. This second clash is deeply unsatisfying. Cortana saving the day as much as Chief does is very appropriate and an excellent way of rounding out her time with the series.
In that case, you won't mind if we return the favor.
Your compassion for mankind is misplaced.
I'm not doing this for mankind.
but only being able to interact via a QuickTime event leaves a very sour taste. It wasn't an altogether clever way of finishing things to begin with, and it's even worse in retrospect given the Didact never appears in another game. You see him once early on in Halo 4, and then you see him a second time at its climax, at which point he's beaten by a couple of buttons. With the campaign's story building him up so much, with the terminals fleshing out his backstory, to have him disappear for good so unceremoniously is hugely wasteful. I've never been the Didact's biggest fan personally, but I do believe he had potential. Cortana's passing, on the other hand, is handled very well, thank the Lord. Unfortunately though, it also suffers from the exact opposite problem the Didact's had, where his death is terrible as he vanishes, never to return, when he needed much more time. Cortana's is perfect, but she is then later brought back for Halo 5, which cheapens the whole thing. I've always felt personally that there was a romantic element between Master Chief and Cortana, although many of you watching this I'm sure will disagree, and this cinematic does a tremendous job of towing the line emotionally to where their relationship could be viewed either way. It's a fitting end to a fantastic character, and her entire arc, in my view, is the best thing about Halo 4's campaign.
I've waited so long to do that.
It was my job to take care of you.
We were supposed to take care of each other. And we did.
Halo 4 also has an epilogue, and it's made up of two cinematics, the first of which features a conversation between Lasky and Chief.
Our duty as soldiers is to protect humanity, whatever the cost.
You say that like soldiers and humanity are two different things. I mean, soldiers aren't machines. We're just people.
Mixed Bag is an apt description of Halo 4, as in spite of what some may say, it's not a terrible title by any means. Story-wise, the series really could have gone somewhere based on what unfolds during the campaign. The Didact side of the story is serviceable at worst and often better, introducing a new villain who didn't appear anywhere near enough, but nevertheless had potential. Chief and Cortana's arc is fantastic throughout, their time together ending on a high note. Imagine a second chapter telling the tale of a Cortana-less Master Chief who has no choice but to face a returning Didact head-on alone. Not only would he have to grapple with the external threat of a vengeful Forerunner, but he'd also have his own internal struggle to deal with, a man as machine as can be, doing his best to reconcile his conflicting emotions. Concerning gameplay, 343 Industries seemingly followed modern trends more than the groundwork laid down by Bungie, and the result is an experience which is modern but fails to elevate the franchise. Halo 4 is less a Halo game and more a Call of Duty game in Halo clothing, with much of the series' freedom of expression replaced by linearity, and in a sense some of the magic has been lost. It features much of what you'd expect from Halo, but structured and arranged in a way which is so very often stifling. Even so, I think there was a world in which these mistakes could have been rectified, but as we all now know in the present, Halo 5's gameplay followed much the same format, and this cannot be viewed as anything other than a mistake. The correct course of action would have been to take the campaign's best parts, its tight gunplay, its visuals, and to some extent its music, and transplant them into a title which was far more stylistically similar to the Halos of old. In the end, a simple phrase nicely sums up my thoughts on the game. Halo 4 is a good first-person shooter, and a middling to poor Halo title. Thanks for watching the video, boys, girls and Spartans. If you had a terrific time, do consider liking, subscribing and sharing your thoughts regarding how Halo 4 ends, and hopefully we'll meet again soon.